gonna ask you a question now.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm gonna actually just ask you to begin with. Just do a quick introduction of yourself. So your name and a hobby that you enjoy. It can be football. It doesn't have to be.
I don't think football is like top of my hobby list. Should I go now?
You can go.
Okay.
So
Should I talk to you though? Okay. Well, I'm Maddie. In terms of hobbies, I think I have quite short phases with hobbies. At the moment, I'm quite into reading and pottery.
Pottery?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, have you made something?
Yeah, I can show you what I made.
Okay, you're going to show what you made afterwards. We're just noting this here.
Yeah.
For posterity.
Yeah.
What are you reading? Sorry, this is not that.
I'm reading this book called Heaven, but I'm not sure how to pronounce the author's name. I think it's Miko Kawakami. She's a Japanese author, and it's quite a short book, but it's just about two people who kind of bond because they're both bullied. It's a really, really good book though, very well written. I like the style.
I'm going to ask you about it again afterwards.
Yeah.
Recommendations, I say, like I'm not actively...
Oh, it's so good.
But
Yeah.
Cool.
Love it.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about football now. There we go.
Yeah.
The super easy beginning with question, unless it turns out not to be, in which case I apologise for introducing it that way. It's just when you first started playing football, and how you got introduced to football, and what that context was.
I've only been playing football for a really, really short amount of time. I started only a few months ago, I think February or March, even though I've kind of been wanting to play for a while. But I just happened to bump into a friend who said that one of her flatmates was hosting a new football club at uni. So yeah, I started doing it through that, and then I really enjoyed it, and another friend said I should join another team that wasn't with uni, and it was an LGBT team. So yeah, quite a recent interest. Yeah.
This is back when we were...
That I'd played football 5 times. Yeah, I'm not good.
No, that's fair. I mean...
I'm not good.
Alright, pack it up, we're going now.
Yeah.
You're not good. Yeah, because I think we met at the Republica...
Yeah.
Just kickabout thing.
Yeah, that was my first time playing for a non-sort of uni event.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's so nice. Well, I'm so pleased that I met you there.
Yeah.
This is going to be slightly different because I met you before and also we're in the same area.
Yeah.
But you've heard of Frank's... Because Frank was introducing it, I think, at the Republica thing as well.
Yeah.
So that's launched. I haven't had the opportunity to go yet. Have you had the opportunity to go yet?
Is that the non-binary?
Yeah, trans and non-binary.
I've been meaning to go. I have not yet. Yeah. No, I really need to, because I've been saying that I want to get back into sports. Because I kind of have sort of let myself drift a bit since Easter, but I need to hop back on it.
Oh, I'm gonna just go back in time just a little bit, just that I don't get too caught up in us talking about the potential of going to the trans non-binary team, although that is also fun. So you play for a uni team. What's its name?
It's technically not a uni team. It's futsal, which is just a casual football group. But it was actually the women's futsal group. So I kind of stuck out a little bit, but I enjoyed it anyway. And I think the fact that it was intended to be more casual helped with that as well. Because I think that's one of the main things that has sort of held me back from participating in team sports before. So, for example, rugby and things like that, it's just, there's sort of that pressure to be, good.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's something very interesting happening with queer teams, especially, that are building spaces for people who are coming to sports for the first time.
Yeah.
Which is a very different ethos from, I'm going to say the word cis heteronormativity a lot today, I can tell, but that sort of more classic idea of what sports should be, which is it's only for people really who have been into it since they were 5, and then they were groomed to become the best sports people ever, and then they had a life-changing injury at 25 and then they have nothing else to do with their lives. I'm very bitter about this fact, by the way.
No, I completely agree. I think, it makes it difficult the older you get starting a sport, because there's that expected level of adequacy, and I'm not adequate. But, I mean, you can only learn, can't you? But I think it takes a lot of confidence to just be okay with being... Am I allowed to swear? Shit. Yeah. But I think especially with LGBT teens, especially, they do seem to be more accepting, because it is supposed to be a space where you're accepted no matter what, so it does have that advantage of having that pressure removed to some extent. Yeah.
I think I don't know enough about futsal, but I'll ask about it in a second. But I did get to go to Manchester and do a training session with Manchester Laces, and both them and a team that I spoke with somebody about in Sheffield have this ethos of how to. They have two different ethos actually of how to include people who haven't traditionally had access to sports in some way or other, and to make space for them first and foremost, which is very interesting, and I think a very topsy-turvy on its head compared to what I've been reading about FA rulings, which is all about, well, what if trans people are just so good that they come in and ruin the sport for everybody else, and we're just like, hi, we haven't traditionally been allowed to play, so why would we be that, I mean, not that somebody who is that good shouldn't be allowed to play, but the idea that there's just scores of trans people waiting
infiltrating.
I was wondering about whether there were any explicitly trans inclusive policies at your university in relation to sports. Do you know about that?
I don't think there's anything official. I think it's more because the societies are all quite individually run. There's not much of a system, as far as I'm aware. So I don't think anyone knows that I'm trans there. I never really brought it up. I just sort of turn up, and because I'm there for the sport. Although the people are really lovely, but it doesn't. As far as I'm aware, it has not come up.
No, fair enough. Because there are several people that I've spoken to who haven't disclosed, and also one shouldn't have to disclose. So if that's the space one is in, and also because it's about the sport, really, as you say. That being said, would you want to be in a space that is more specifically geared towards or explicit in having inclusive policies? I know that you said that this is kind of an informal space, but in the sense of if you were to do sports outside of uni, because uni ends at some point.
Yes, ending soon.
Yeah. Or would you just go for like a women's team, or what would you be?
I'm not sure, because I think I'm from a very conservative area, so I'm kind of used to just adapting, if that makes sense. So I think if there weren't any, I think I wouldn't be held back from joining a women's team if there weren't alternatives, or if I felt that I was gaining more from that than a trans team or an LGBT team or club. So
fair enough. You kind of have a distinction, I think, out of everybody that I've talked with. I think, this is not a negative, by the way, because I was thinking through my head and I was like, does this sound patronising? I hope not. But everybody else that I've spoken to has played football as a kid, and then has either continued into adulthood or has stopped and started, or stopped and is maybe hoping to start again. So you're the first person who has begun as an adult, which is quite exciting, because I think it maybe could speak to potentially the idea that there are more spaces that are popping up that are just there to appeal to people who, like you said, want to start at some point in their lives and haven't, played for 20 years beforehand or something. Yeah, that wasn't a question. It was just very interesting, actually, because I don't know how to say it, your story in this particular instance, your story starts where some of the other people's stories have ended. So there's something very interesting there about the sort of fluidity of how this can all look.
Yeah, especially because I started with the women's futsal. Obviously, this is all very recent, but I started with the women's futsal and then joined more LGBT spaces after that. So, yeah.
Why football?
Why football? Because someone came up to me and said, "Do you want to play?" So, yeah, there wasn't anything specific that I think I'm quite open to just trying new things generally. And I genuinely don't think it would have happened if I hadn't just bumped into my friend, and just said, "Oh, what are you doing later?" And then she said, "Oh, yeah, one of my housemates is running this new football club. Do you want to come?" So, yeah, that's where it started, really. Yeah, and I think actually that was, even though it was sort of a women's futsal team, as I say, because it was more casual, that it did sort of boost my confidence a bit, and that made me want to go to the LGBT ones as well, which again I don't think I would have done if I hadn't had that sort of build up initially. So yeah.
Cool. Have you tried any other sports?
I've tried a few sports, yeah. Again, through uni, I've tried both touch rugby and rugby. And both times I just get this sort of crippling anxiety that you get, when you're in PE at school, and just having to, yeah, play a sport that you're not good at with people that are good at that. I'm not the most physically skilled, shall we say. I'm quite clumsy. So yeah, it's something that I used to be very sporty, and I sort of gradually got more and more anxious about it. So yeah, the rugby didn't work out just because it was just too... I enjoyed it, but the first 3/4 of it was just me trying to get over my nervousness.
Around the time when I really started moving away from sports, because I also used to do a lot of sports, I remember really vividly this one time that I was at PE, and I can't remember what the context was, but I was there, I was holding a basketball, and I was too scared to try and throw it into the net for most of the class. I stood with a basketball, trying to psych myself up to just try and throw it once. And I do not know, it must have been for over half an hour. Just me standing in place with other people doing other things around me. So who knows if any of them at one point went, they've been standing still for a really long time. Hey, who knows? It's, yeah.
For me, at rugby, it would be someone would pass me a ball, I'd then panic, and then just throw it in any direction as fast as I could, and spend the majority of the game just avoiding having to catch it and just running.
I feel like football has I don't know if it's unique or not. I really like football, so I'm slightly biased. But I think it has quite a unique ability, to be played at many different levels and with many different sort of setups, because at its core, adding and taking away rules, it's just a ball that is kicked and has to get into what one can make that resembles a goal. Although even the goal part can be done away with and one can just kick a ball. The other thing being that when I've played football, I'm not going to put this on you necessarily, it could be that you're just like, no, I get super anxious with football as well, but for me, when I play football, when I'm in the middle of it, I don't feel anxious in the same way that I have done with other sports historically, because so much is going on at once and we're all just sort of running.
Yeah.
That you don't have as much time to have to think about, if you do get the ball and your level is, I'm just going to kick it away from me, then that is kind of an acceptable thing to do. Like, if one is playing at that level, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of capacity for football to introduce people to sports as a whole, just to get out of one's head. I don't know if you felt that way about it at all. Or
yeah, I think the community around a sport makes a massive difference to your confidence playing it and your the likelihood of you continuing to play it. And that's definitely true of football. Because as I say, if it's a welcoming, accepting community, then it doesn't matter who you are, how good or bad you are. You're just there for a bit of fun. Yeah. Or for me, maybe I don't take it seriously enough.
You take it exactly the right amount of serious.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like the idea of taking it too seriously. I mean, if one is not a professional player, I think maybe some people who shall be named, I don't know, presumably cis men, maybe take it a bit too seriously in a way that doesn't really warrant their skill sets or, the ability to actually have fun while playing it.
Yeah.
There was a very interesting conversation I had with somebody who's on an all-men's football team, and he's not out as trans to them, but he is able to challenge the ways that their sort of ingrained toxic masculinities affect them. And that was a very interesting contrast to some of the other conversations I've had, because most of the people I've spoken to are obviously on, in some way, queer teams or women's teams, which there's a separate but connected conversation there as well of women's football spaces versus men's football spaces. Again, I don't know how much you've gone into this or not, because I've obviously had a lot of time to think about this, but it seems as if, not universally, but in many ways, women's football has more of a capacity for
patience.
Yeah. Actually, maybe I'll just ask you, do you think that there is something within women's football that distinguishes it from, women's football spaces, I should say, that distinguishes it from men's football spaces, that potentially could make it more, less anxiety inducing to consider if one were to want to join a team as not even just a trans person, but like just a queer person generally, maybe, to want to join in a space like that rather than a men's space?
Yeah, there is no way that I'd want to join a men's team at all. And I think even though the group is futsal, which is intended to be casual football anyway, if that was mixed gender, I think I'd actually be less likely to play. I think because the touch rugby group I played in was mixed gender as well. I'm not sure. I think a lot of it is personal, personal anxieties though, because when I was in the mixed gender touch rugby group, everyone was very friendly and welcoming and patient, but it was my own sort of feeling that I was holding other people back that was kind of putting me off, rather than external things going on. I can't really speak from experience because I haven't tried joining a men's football team, but I think women are just women tend to be a little more patient, I think, but I am playing stereotypes a little bit there, and I think it'd be quite different if I joined an actual football group or football team as opposed to the futsal, because that's for people that specifically don't like the competitive aspect of it, which is what appealed to me. Yeah.
So as a hypothetical, again, just one of the spaces one of the people that I've talked with created a space in Sheffield that was based less around specifically sort of ideas about a woman's space and then making a woman's space trans inclusive, but about people who for any reason had lacked an ability to access football so it was all genders, and it was also welcoming of people who have played before and maybe are slightly better, but the ethos of the group and what they enforce every time they play is that people, especially in this case cis men, who come to play are there to create a supporting role rather than it, and it's a non-competitive space. They don't do competition. So the people who have historically had access to football are there to play essentially almost the role of like an extra trainer in a way. So they are there to support people rather than this idea that one enters a space and then has to prove that one is good enough to be there, or even subconsciously feel like one has to prove one is good enough to be there. So in that hypothetical space, and I feel like I'm putting this a bit on you to make a decision right now, but would that maybe influence you differently if that was how a space was built in a more general sense, not just that one space, but there were spaces on offer like that all over the place? Definitely.
I was actually thinking back to the question you asked last, but I think one thing about the women's futsal is that you're mentioning that people have historical access to sports, and I was actually thinking about women's access to sport, to football rather, because when I was in school, I think I was taught football. I think probably twice in the 5 years I was in secondary school, and there wasn't a women's football team, because football is historically a very man-based sport. I think that is actually one thing that drew me towards the women's futsal, is that a lot of the people that played were beginners because they just hadn't been taught football before, and I think that's why that appealed to me more than say a men's futsal team would, because men have more opportunities to play football, so they're more likely to be better, and then as I say, that sort of anxiety of not being good enough kicks in. Sorry, I just answered the last question instead of the question you just asked.
No, it was a really good answer.
Thank you. I took a minute to think.
And also, a lot of what I do is not ask questions. I'm just saying stuff. I shouldn't say shit. I think it's very good stuff actually. But I'm just saying stuff because, and I like the conversational aspect of it rather than me interrogating you in the intricacies of football for beginners, whatever that looks like.
Am I the first beginner that you've interviewed then?
Yeah.
Oh.
That's why I'm sort of like, this is quite novel.
Different.
Yeah. And it's really lovely because a lot of the spaces, several of the people I've spoken to have been building spaces specifically for beginners, but apart from you, no beginners. I think maybe because I have a feeling maybe a lot of beginners don't feel like they're adequately footballers enough to maybe take part in a project like this. I don't know. Yeah,
I was thinking that a little bit. I think I did tell you that actually when you asked. I said, I've only been playing football about 4 weeks or something. But
I think I was quite excited about it back then as well. I was just like, yes.
Yeah.
Infinite diversity in infinite ways, etc.
Yeah.
So there might be some slightly simplistic questions in this because sorry, you're holding that space now of the beginner's sphere, but I am pleased that you were willing to do it. I actually did want to ask about, very briefly, just about being kid and whether there was access to space. I know you've basically just answered that, but in terms of what sports were on offer for girls versus what was on offer for boys, do you remember?
In primary school, secondary school, or both?
Hit me with both.
Ooh. I think my school was, it played to the stereotypes quite a lot. There wasn't women's cricket or women's rugby. I was never taught rugby at school. And there was, never a team. And I was from quite a small town as well. So I think it's easier in a city to make spaces like that, but there just weren't enough people, I don't think. yeah, it was quite stereotypical. Like the girls netball team. There wasn't a boys netball team.
It's very interesting that I feel like there's a big overlap in the discussion about women's access to sports and trans people's access to sports. I think it is very much the same conversation, and it's been made to pretend to be two different conversations or two different problems that are against each other.
Yeah.
But actually, and that's something that I think comes out of interviewing non-binary people and trans-masc people and trans men. There's a whole group of people who haven't had access to sports in the same way that women haven't had access to sports as kids. And now it feels like the conversation is very much like we're actually building whole new spaces that the FA can't even dream of because they're obsessed with their little competitions and their little trophies. And so they're inventing a whole problem that doesn't exist so that they don't have to look at the ways that they're actually not making it accessible for women.
I wonder actually how much of it is systematic and how, I mean, a lot of it is systematic, but how much of it is enforced. Like you play, the boys are encouraged to play football at school. Because I remember in primary school, the football was so popular with the boys. And the girls just didn't really play with the boys, but I wonder how much of that was, I know, because you're obviously brought up to do, girl things and boy things, so it kind of makes sense. But I was very much a tomboy at school, and I wore the boys' shorts and the boys' school shoes, and if I met someone new, I'd tell them I was a boy. So I did try and participate a little bit in that, but I remember at the time feeling a little bit inadequate because I hadn't been brought up on it, I guess.
And what isn't really, I was a tomboy too. Although in Denmark there were no school uniforms, so I just wore my brother's hand-me-downs. But there comes a point, I think, when I felt that I went from being kind of an amorphous kind of blob that could play with whoever I wanted to no longer being welcome in boys' spaces. Sometimes that was enforced in certain ways, and sometimes it was just the feeling that I wasn't good enough to be in those spaces.
Yeah.
And that played really heavily into sports because I used to play specifically sports with boys, and then at some point it just... but also I think Denmark's a little bit different because when I was growing up, and I don't know if that's different now, but when I was growing up, all of the sports teams that I joined outside of school were mixed genders. So I played hockey, I did judo, and I played football, and I swam. And judo and swimming were divided by skills, belt, and also judo was by weight as well. And then football and hockey were both mixed teams. So I feel like, I mean, that's because I've been speaking with people raised in the UK, but it's very interesting to hear this divide enforced even more.
Yeah. As I say, I was from a very small town, so it was even more enforced, I think. I was in a lot of mixed gender sports as well. I kind of forgot until now, but I did tennis a lot when I was a kid. I swam a lot, so those are more mixed. But yeah, especially it was specifically team sports were very, very gender divided, and there was definitely a trend of the boys do football, the boys do rugby, the girls do netball. So, and you found as well that if you went to a supposedly mixed gendered event, it would be either all girls or all boys, except for the odd one or two people, even if it was advertised as a mixed gender extracurricular. So
I wonder if there's still something a little bit in people's in a social sense. I mean, I say this, it's not just in a social sense, because as far as I'm aware, these kind of divisions are still how it's done in schools for the most part.
Yeah, I wouldn't know.
But yeah, that's just what I assume. I think the youngest person I've spoken to was 20, and so when he got out of school, it was still like that.
I wonder if it would be more open if you were brought up in a city. But I can imagine that there's been very little change in the school that I went to, because I just don't see how it would change, because it's more on the basis of, I know you just got a constant cycle of the types of people that are being brought up and the number of people that are being brought up. There's just, if there are less diverse people, then there's less spaces for diversity. Yeah. I think that's also why I'm so open to joining a women's football team, because let alone having a queer football team, I was never offered women like football when I was growing up, and I did identify as a girl. So in my head it's like, oh well, there's a space for women, that's the best I can ask for. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I realised that there are queer specific teams, and it's because I've moved into a city that those opportunities have arisen, and I think that's made me very grateful, but also maybe not as critical as I could be.
I mean, I think as well, a lot of the spaces that are starting out as women, I maybe have come from the opposite direction, where I actually started this project being a little bit hypercritical of the term women and non-binary, because I feel not included in that term, and so, you know, I was coming in with my own personal bias, and then actually hearing a lot of people talk about being on teams that started out as women's teams, found out that they had one or more members that were trans, and then opened up that space to be like, yes, we want this space to be more inclusive, but there is that, I guess, emotional relationship to womanhood. Again, this is very hard for me to frame, because I never actually had that emotional connection to womanhood in the same way, but I understand, of course, that a lot of people have done, and also the way that women's spaces are individually, not necessarily as a whole, but in a lot of individual women's spaces, making the effort to open up. And then also the fact that, like you say, those spaces, the access for women and girls hasn't existed, and in some places still doesn't exist in the first place. So yeah, I think there's something about allyship and supporting each other within that, both us supporting women's spaces and women's spaces opening themselves up for trans people.
I think also women's football specifically, they're already going against a big sort of stereotype, because as I say, where I'm from, women didn't really play football. So the fact that they're themselves getting over this sort of social barrier in sport of women playing football more, it makes me wonder if they're more open to opening queer spaces, because you're already sort of define that social barrier a little bit. And I do wonder if men's football wouldn't be quite as open, because it is historically a man's sport. But I don't know, that's just a thought.
It's been something that I've really, I hope anyway, that I've really opened myself up to during this project, because I also went to there's a National Football Museum, and it's in Manchester. And I went there, and it was lovely. The ticket's like £12, but then you can go all year apparently. So that's I'll go again at some point, because I did go through it quite quickly. But a lot of that museum was interesting because it felt like two things at once. On the one hand, it had, this is our glorious game of football, and which coach is your favourite coach, and here's England versus Brazil in 1983 or what have you, and that was mostly all men's. Oh, actually no, let's say like 1963 or something. And then there was the history of women's football, because all of this would be guys, and the history of women's football in the museum it's quite extensive actually, and it feels like something that they've really put an effort into. It feels like a separate. You can really feel the segregation that exists. Has existed and still exists for women's football, because they would be like, so women started really getting into playing football in the sense of building organised teams that had fans and the like during World War One, and then in the 20s they were banned because the FA, and that was also from the FA, and then they continuously would build these little teams that would be outside of the FA, so they'd be building them sort of with different kind of support. I mean, not as much support, of course, because the FA is the part that has all the money and all the marketing and all the sponsorships and things. But they build them nonetheless, and they continue to build them, and even if they didn't work out for as long, etc., they continue to go and do leagues and things like that. And then it wasn't until I think in 1978, if I'm remembering correctly, that the FA were like, oh, why, come on, you can play football officially. We guess that we can recognise you as sports people, even if you are second to, the real sports people. And it feels like that that sentiment still exists despite women officially being allowed to play on like high competitive levels. And it might not even be until like last year with England beating Germany that England, at least as a country, has kind of really started properly recognising its women's team.
Yeah.
As at that level.
That's interesting. I think it's also interesting just how big, either in my head and from what I observed growing up, football does seem to be the sport of England, and yet it's just not for women at all, and it's not associated with women in any sense.
It's interesting. Actually, that's an interesting that you bring that up, because I've also, if football is the sport of England, then what does it say that there are several groups of people who are excluded from what is a cultural national pastime? And what does that say about our ability to access cultural spaces and being involved in society in at the level that one should have access to it? Even if one doesn't like football, one doesn't have to want to play football. As a community, you might not have thought about this to this extent yet, but I think maybe as a beginner you'd have a very interesting also perspective on this. What trans people, and maybe the ethos of the spaces that are being built for people as historically excluded from football as a whole, how trans people kind of, I guess, I don't want to call trans people a symbol of anything, because we're people, we're not symbols, but what it is that we actually add to a space that has become quite stagnant in what it's allowing people to be and how people are allowed to access it. What trans people are offering to a space like that, potentially.
I think because as we said, football is kind of seen as a man's sport, and there's a clear divide between this is what a man is, this is what a woman is. A man plays football, a man plays rugby, a woman plays netball, a woman does this. That you're kind of told again and again over when you're growing up and when you're choosing what sport to play. So I think one big advantage of just queer people being in that space is just leading people to question why those spaces are divided the way that they are. And sort of the recognition that there is a lot of fluidity, because I think especially the big conversation about trans inclusion in sport is that there's sort of physical reasons why a trans man couldn't play with cis men, or why a trans woman can't play with cis women, and I think having queer people and non-binary people sort of dance on that line kind of brings those questions to the fore and makes you realise that the sort of assumptions that people are sort of making to try and maintain that gender division aren't very stable, if that makes sense. I think the biological argument just falls on its head, really, and then it brings questions, well, why aren't these spaces more inclusive? Why is it a man's sport? So just in summary, just more inclusion, less division based on trivial matters. Just let people play. It's not that deep.
It's honestly as well just like, you mean this sport that we made up and we make up the rules for?
Yeah, at the end of the day, you're just kicking an object at each other. I do wonder if it's been overcomplicated a bit. Just a tad. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that might also. I mean, I get it. Again, we did mention national pastime, and it's had this whole mythos built around it now. So I get it. I get why people feel protective of this thing, but also ultimately, it's what we make it. I don't know.
Sorry. Yeah, I felt like I really rambled on the last question. I was kind of. Okay.
No, you're good.
Okay.
You're absolutely good. So you play with futsal, you still play with them, right?
It's now ended because of summer, but I'm gonna sneak my way back in at the end because I'm not technically a student, but I do want to keep playing. So I'm gonna start again in September if they let me.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
That seems they should do. I feel like I feel guilty because like I am the person who gets really into football when I play. I get really competitive in the match itself.
I don't think I do, but I think that's just because I'm not good enough to be competitive. I enjoy the running. I think I'm quite fast. I think especially because I'm a good runner and less good at actually kicking the ball. So I think that's easier to be in defence, just kick, because then I don't have to kick the ball in any. Obviously, it's better if I do, but if I'm striking, it's kind of embarrassing if I kick it and then it just goes absolutely nowhere near the goalpost, which happens a lot. But
We've all been there.
Yeah, I'm staying in Leeds next year, but I'm leaving the student bubble, so I'm gonna try and integrate myself more into Leeds clubs and events as opposed to uni clubs and events. And expand out of that circle a bit.
It seems like you already have quite a good sort of network of people from which to draw inspiration from.
Yeah, I think I do actually, but I'd like more. More.
Cool. I'm gonna ask you a couple of sort of vaguer questions, and I feel like I need to disclaim this because a couple of people have gotten stressed out about this one. I'm not putting it on you to fix the future of football.
Okay.
It's just a hypothetical.
Yeah.
If, say, in about 50-ish years, shall we say like trans inclusion and trans support and all of that is just going splendidly and has just been going forwards for the past 50 years, and everybody's so yay for trans people and inclusion generally, sort of, because for example there are men's teams right now, especially gay men's teams, that do say that they are trans inclusive, but they don't always know how to implement the trans inclusion and such. So assuming that all the teams know how to do this beyond just the saying it, what do you think would be, it's both in terms of sort of potential gender divisions, but also in terms of skill set divisions, what do you think would be the best sort of way of building a space for football that is inclusive for all? So would that potentially be different levels of competitive and non-competitive spaces? Would it be lots and lots of different kinds of gendered spaces? Would it be like queer specific spaces and then non-queer specific, or not queer exclusionary spaces, but just spaces that necessarily don't specifically go, we're a queer team but just for everyone? Would it be women's and men's and non-binary and trans teams, or would it be just a whole mixed free-for-all? There's a lot of different potentials in it.
Yeah. I think gender division only, like the gender question within sport only seems to be a massive issue when it gets increasingly competitive, because that's when people care about who's advantaged and who's disadvantaged. So I think that actually at the lowest skill levels it's okay to have mixed sports, and mixed genders, and that would include in my brain anyway, like cis men, cis women, trans people, queer people, because you're just learning to play a sport, and I don't think it should be that much of a barrier if you're all in the same skill set, and then potentially more divisive the higher up the skill set you go. But it would be nice to have more queer beginners teams, I think. But I think it's more of a question of numbers, I think, because I think if you live in a city, you have the capacity to have more some groups and clubs for specific groups of people, and I don't think every area has that sort of luxury just because you don't have enough people. But in 50 years, if the issue is still the pressure or feeling of exclusions, then that's I just would have hoped in 50 years that wouldn't be such of a big issue. Of course, that's optimistic, but
it's an optimistic question.
Yeah, it is an optimistic question, which I quite like. But yeah, so basically just in hopefully mix at the lower skill sets, if that feeling of exclusion has been mitigated a little bit by the time it comes about. But I think my worries are different to a lot of queer people's worries though, because mine more is about the skill of it as opposed to the inclusivity side of it.
I think the skill of inclusivity does speak to each other.
Yeah.
Because I think if we're sort of repositioning the question from the sort of ridiculous sort of how do we protect our women and girls from the evil trends, or like how do we create these segregated spaces because of how we've created these intense gender divisions, to how do we create spaces that are open to all kinds of levels. It's a difference in, I think, the ethos of what sports means, rather than it being a way of measuring who's the best of the best. It's a human pastime and a thing that connects humans, which actually I do have a follow-up question on that. Yeah. But
I think because it would be nice to build on my skill set, but I'm only playing casually. I'm only doing it because I enjoy it. So I don't want to have those pressures placed on me. So really all personally I'm looking for is an inclusive and accepting space that's patient, and I do think that is often more common with queer spaces, but not exclusively.
I like the word patience. I like that you've used that word. It's a good word. I think that's something, I don't know. I like that in the when our community is really good.
Yeah. And I did find that with I found that the LGBT, as I say, I've only been once, but the LGBT did seem patient and accepting. Was the futsal team did as well, but there was very mixed skill sets, I think. I mean, there were a lot of beginners, but there were also some people that were very good, and I was kind of aware that I'm letting the team down a little bit, but I don't know how much of that is internalized.
Again, you may not really have an answer to this, and that's fine, but I think there's something very interesting in what you're specifically talking about, which is the division along cities and the countryside or smaller towns, and the support that's on offer, or the way that one can change things more easily in one place or another. So, with that in mind, and also again without any pressure, what do you think might be needed to, not even specifically trans related, but just as a whole, to make more diverse open spaces in a smaller town?
Yeah, I think the issue is in smaller areas there are just less people in general. So at my school there were not very many gay people. There were, at the time, I don't know if some people have considered their gender a little differently now, but at the time probably like one or two trans people or open trans people in my year out of 300 people or something. So there's just not enough people unless you go, miles out of town. So really the only solution is making available spaces more inclusive as opposed to offering alternative for diverse groups specifically. More encouragement of diverse people, I suppose. Yeah, and I don't know how you'd go about it, but more actively encouraging people that are often marginalised. But yeah, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure how. In my head, I'm a little bit pessimistic about it because I think I'm not sure how likely it is to change. But and as I say, I'm just sort of person that's used to sort of just adapting to whatever space you put in anyway. But as you said, that's not really the way it should be, just because that's the way it is. Yeah.
I guess I wonder if there's examples somewhere in the UK of a small town that sort of has people within it that have decided that actually we're going to make that effort. I wonder if that example exists. I haven't necessarily come across it with this project because most people that have gotten in touch with me are based in cities. Although not everybody comes from a city, and the people who have not been based in cities have been kind of like, yeah, it's not really all there yet.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you, in my town, if there's not a women's football team, there's definitely not going to be a queer football team. So you've got the dual problem of tackling, making the men's football team more inclusive to include women, and then the additional issue of trying to make that they're more open to queer people. So I think really the only solution is having a mixed gender sport, but that's I think that's more difficult said than done, because as you've got that history of boys are often taught from when they're young and girls aren't, so you have that differing skill set. So yeah, I'm not sure, it's a sticky issue, I think.
I think also, at least this was my experience growing up as well, is that like girls will often also quite early on internalise these ideas of how they should be, and so they will also not necessarily want to join those spaces in the first place. Yeah. And then the ones who do are usually either gay or not girls by the end of it.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah. But yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, women, I think girls just should be encouraged to play football. I mean, yeah, simple solution, just if the boys are being taught football from a young age, teach the girls as well, and then you don't have to have that gender divide in the first place. Yeah, maybe that will get better after the women's Euros. I think that was quite a big impact on how people view women's football.
I wonder as well if there isn't not just football, but in lots of different areas that, because you can make a girls' team and you can fund that team, and that would be good on its own. But then if you're not next to that, also dispelling notions about how joining a sports team will make you less interesting to boys or will make you less of a girl, because not every girl ends up being gay or trans, despite my experiences.
I think it's just a lot of people who don't necessarily stick to social norms, which often is it does often overlap with gay and trans people, and you have the same in women's rugby. 90% of the team are gay. Yeah.
So there's I can imagine there's a lot of different. And also I don't really know about this personally necessarily, but I imagine that there might also just be like I imagine that small towns and the countryside just aren't given as much support as a blanket whole in anything. and so maybe just an idea that these kind of places also contain people, shockingly, and also deserve funding and some kind of support in some way. But
because at the end of the day, there aren't actually. I think living in a city, and especially for me living in the student bubble, I think you get a sort of slightly warped impression of the real numbers of trans and non-binary people, because in a city there just are more, and because of social media, and because you meet one person, you meet 10 others, it's easier to get in touch with a lot of queer people, but in reality there aren't actually that many. And if I go back home where I live, there are barely any. So yeah, easier in a city.
What is it that makes you enjoy playing football in the spaces that you thus far have tried?
Yeah. I enjoy the sport itself. I genuinely just really, I like the fact that you're running for a purpose, that you're playing with a team, that there's an end goal. So I just enjoy the game itself. I enjoy the community a lot as well, and that does make a massive difference. Because it can be a very social thing. You've got an entire community that you're being sort of open to when you join a football team or a football group. So obviously it's going to make a difference whether or not you feel like you fit in, or if you get on with the people that you're playing with. So yeah, for me it is enjoyment and the social side of it. I don't intend to be competitive or I mean I wouldn't mind, but yeah, it's more fun for me, whilst I think other people are learning to develop their skills and get a sense of fulfillment when they win a goal or the game, you don't win a goal. But yeah.
I like that.
Because I enjoy exercising, but I often find that I have to, if I'm going for a run or something like that, I really have to encourage myself to do it, and a lot of the time I won't do it. Whilst football, I'm always looking forward to it. I always want to go, even though I'm working my hardest and end up sweating loads. It doesn't seem as much of a chore, because you're just playing a game. It's a bit of fun, and I think it's a way of sort of reconnecting with that sort of childhood energy a little bit as well, because when you're little you do run about a lot, you do play games, and I feel like sport is really the only outlet you have for doing that when you're older. Yeah, because I don't think you're going to have much luck getting a group of adults to play it. I mean, I personally would.
I was just thinking, depends on the adults, probably.
Yeah, true. If you find the right people.
You just need enough people to do shenanigans with. You couldn't just gather a random group of adults like you could with kids and just be like, play it.
Yeah. But it's an energy outlet, like you said, and yeah, I think it's nice to combine exercising and socializing in that way. Yeah. Although it's not just exercising for me. I think it initially started off like that, but it's not that now. Yeah.
I'm very bad at exercise as a concept. I can't just run for the sake of running. For that matter, I can like, I used to cycle every day to school, and it would be about 45 minutes. I never grew used to that as a concept.
Yeah.
And I do technically like cycling. It's just I need to have something beyond what's the activity itself.
Yeah.
I guess my brain will just go into spirals of like, you're getting tired. Man, you're sweaty. Are you tasting blood right now?
I think also with when you're playing a sport, there is an aim behind it. If it is, which team wins, or you're the first to get to how many goals or whatever it is. And I think having that, you do have that short term fulfillment out of it. Whilst I think if you go to the gym, or if you go running or whatever, even though it can be enjoyment, and you do get that rush of dopamine and serotonin afterwards, it's sort of a long term goal. And with football, you are developing your skills over time, but it's not. I don't think you necessarily join with the long term sort of goal in mind, or the idea of where you want to be in 6 months' time with it. Yeah.
I really like that you called it. I mean, it is play. People do say playing sports. It's not like
you're playing a game. That's
yeah.
And that applies to football, and it applies to children rocking about. Yeah.
We as adults really don't have enough play.
No.
We're like weird little animals that just haven't been giving ourselves enough enrichment.
Yeah. I would just love to play Duck Duck Goose or something like that, honestly. I feel like that would really give me a sense of fulfillment that nothing else would.
we should see
should we just gather a load of people and play play tag or something.
We used to do that back when I did judo. Every once in a while, instead of the normal warm up, which I hated, the guy in charge would just have us play a form of it. I don't know what it's called in English. It's called standing troll in Danish. So you get tagged and then you have to stand and then...
Stuck in the mud.
There we go.
Oh, yeah, Stuck in the Mud. Great game.
Standing troll. Stuck in the mud.
Yeah.
But yeah, then because it would be a judo equivalent, in order to get freed, they have to like throw you in some way.
Yeah.
I almost got kicked in the face during that and I got a black eye. But yeah, I was just like, we could do that.
It's very acceptable in a sports setting, I think, and rarely outside of that.
It's very funny though.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is something that you've considered in some way or not, but in the shortish time that you've played, is there something that you have experienced that you were like that really, I don't know, that stuck with you for some reason, either as a positive memory or something that I don't know, maybe I don't know if you had like a specific thing that made you go, actually, yeah, I really want to keep playing this, or if it was just something that made you go, oh, this was funny.
Yeah. I think there were a few people that I just really, really got on with, and that made me want to keep going. Especially because I think a lot of people were a little bit kind of, well, I think I'm quite self-deprecating when it comes to playing the game, because I am bad, and you can't take yourself too seriously, otherwise you're just gonna put yourself down. So I'm not sure about any specific memories. It's just really getting on with people. I scored after the first few times. I scored a few goals actually, in the futsal game. I think I scored 3 or 4 goals, and the person in the goal was someone who was an experienced goalie as well. So then I had a few people come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh my god, well done, good job. It can really see that you've improved." And one girl came up to me and said, "Oh, you were really shit in the first half. I can see that you've improved a lot. That's impressive." So I was like, thank you. Yeah, so that felt good, and that definitely made me want to carry on. I think just having your efforts appreciated or just encouraged, it's really nice. And that is definitely something that's very beneficial about being in a team sport, is that you do have, it's often a supportive community, and when you do something right, then you are sort of praised for that. And if you do something wrong, then a lot of people just go, "Oh well, better luck next time," or "That was a close shot," even if it wasn't.
Very gracious with that.
Yeah. Yeah. So just finding some very supportive people, especially if it's something that I can be insecure about. So yeah, I think that was kind of a healing moment a little bit.
Yeah.
I've been very lucky in that sense, because I think that's not necessarily the sort of reactions that I would have got if I'd joined a women's football team 20 years ago or 10 years ago. I've been quite lucky that it has been, as I say, I haven't actually told anyone, as far as I'm aware, that I'm non-binary in the futsal team, but it doesn't really matter how I present or look, because there are quite a lot of people who are a bit gender bendy or queer anyway, so it's quite an open space in that sense, but I think I'm quite lucky, because not all spaces are quite as supportive. Yeah.
And also, queer spaces it's about seeing the ways that we're overlapping with each other, which is always a really nice experience, I feel.
Yeah.
Just being like, this person could be butch, or could be non-binary, or butch non-binary, or trans man, or any number of self descriptors.
Yeah.
And we're in the same space because we find comfort in the same space.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think sometimes it is nice to just go into a setting where you can just put all that on the shelf and just kick an object at each other.
I think there is something wired in humans that we see round and we wish to kick.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the real connective tissue of football, is that it simply is our most ingrained desire to kick things, and if not to kick, then perchance to throw.
Yeah.
We're pretty near the end.
Mm-hmm.
I have 2 more questions left unless something comes up in either of them.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is why, as somebody who has himself been getting into football, why do you think that other queer and trans people maybe should get into football as well?
I think a lot of I think if sometimes your own worries or concerns is what's holding you back, I think it's sometimes a good idea to just push yourself a little bit and just try it. Because when I tried it, I got an experience that I wasn't expecting. Because when I've played rugby or something like that, I do have that crippling anxiety, and I just didn't have that with football because it was just so supportive and open. And yeah, I think sometimes you're the biggest thing holding you back. Plus, these spaces aren't going to change unless people actively go and find them.
Yeah.
So if more people go looking to play football, there's going to be more queer teams. It's a simple solution. But yeah, I think it can bring you a community. It can bring you some joy, a new hobby. Yeah, I think there's a lot to get out of it. It's definitely made my life a lot more fulfilling, I think. Yeah.
I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice thing to combine hobbies and things that you're interested with a social life, because that just does them just open up a new a new aspect of your life that you can talk about and experience. It's nice.
It is nice. I think especially for us, for trans people, I think a lot of us have experienced being very closed off from community spaces and not knowing how to access community spaces.
Yeah.
But they do exist. In some places more than others, for sure. But they're developing, for sure.
I think you might find as well that there are more queer people than expected. You've got a new person to bond with. Not that you should just exclusively bond with other queer people, but if it's a comforting factor, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. It's also I was thinking about the Republica kickabout now, and I was like, it really was just pouring it down during the first part. But then it got really nice and warm. It was quite nice.
But yeah, I feel like I really, even though I only turned up to that one event, I really got a lot out of it, because everyone was so chatty and lovely. Everyone was then going to a queer film festival afterwards. I ended up going to the queer film festival. I ended up chatting to lots of people. I met you. I ended up doing this interview, and that was just from choosing once to go to one football match. Yeah. And it opened up so many opportunities and new experiences that I wouldn't have had if I just decided to stay in bed that day. Yeah. So
there is a life out there.
There is a life out there, and I think small things can open up a lot of different opportunities.
We've gone through a lot of spaces.
Yeah.
We did good.
Yeah.
We're smart people.
This is an interesting talk. I enjoyed this.
Hey, I'll keep that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
the end. I just enjoyed this. It was fun.
Good. I'm going to turn off the camera now.
Yep.
There we go.